Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV. I'm also the founder of SFO Continuity, kind of a private mastermind group, a private club dedicated to families of wealth and family offices, and the educational platform, Family Office Masterclass. I am back, as some of you might have heard, from my great trip to several parts of Europe, primarily Austria, and it's a pleasure to be back. We're heading to the home stretch of the year. And there is one subject that I think many of you as a family office are not familiar with that is happening in 2024 that is very, very significant. The 2024 Corporate Transparency Act and why family offices need to know. Our special guest is the well-known, a great friend, and one of the most truly iconic attorneys globally, not just here in the US for family offices, a return guest. We're very fortunate to have him on, and that would be Thomas J. Handler, partner, chair of the Advanced Planning and Family Office Practice Group at Handler Thayer. Tom, welcome back.
Angelo, thanks so much for having me and for your thoughtful introduction. It's great to be back.
Excellent. Why don't we get right to it? This may be a little bit of a hard pill for some of the families, family offices, private trust companies, trust, captive insurers for the family. This encompasses potentially a lot, and I think is way more intrusive than a lot of families that may be familiar from afar with it. So again, what some call the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act. Audience, what I'm going to do a little differently on this one is I'm kind of going to give Tom the floor to give a pretty comprehensive overview. I'll chime in a little bit for a little bit of clarity, and then we'll have a little time at the end to go legal trends for family offices broadly, US and around the world. But for the most part, we're going to focus on Tom giving a pretty detailed overview of the Corporate Transparency Act. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think perhaps I'll start by paraphrasing a Wall Street Journal author whose name I should recall and don't, but he wrote a whole article about the CTA, not as much about the mechanics, but about the problems, issues. And the title was quite good. And I might be destroying this, but something to the effect of the death of privacy. And to that extent, that's not a bad summary of what this act does. In context, though, I think it's important to at least understand as a backdrop how we got here and what the government's trying to achieve. So for some time, we've had a lot of bills passed, and the EU has passed some as well, and other countries as well, that have tried to button this up a bit. But it really got turbocharged when the Panama Papers came out. That was the real impetus for this. And fortunately, I covered that very closely and thought, boy, I'm doing all this work and research, and it's not gonna get you. I think I ended up with 5 radio shows and a couple of interviews coming off of that act. So the Panama Papers were fairly stunning. But you may recall that there was a large law firm in Panama of which I knew, and I know a number of Panamanian lawyers that thought these guys were over their skis. And in effect, they were knowingly hiding assets for American citizens and others, kind of playing fast and loose and avoiding the disclosure rules, which really can no longer be avoided. So in terms of the context, once the Patriot Act passed, where you run the risk of losing your habeas corpus rights for not reporting, when you can go to jail and be thrown in Guantanamo Bay, that's a pretty serious provision. So the Patriot Act, although the idea of catching terrorists and bad guys is a very good one, the price was an incredible incursion into the privacy rights of American citizens, which in view of the 9/11 attacks was tolerated. But it's still a huge incursion. And unfortunately, these rights that we have in the Constitution continue to be eroded at an incredibly fast pace, and that gives many of us a pause for concern. Globally, the EU and many countries are on what's called the Common Reporting Standards, CRS, which the US is not subscribed to. And pursuant to that standard, countries openly share information about each other's citizens, where the money is, how it's held, where it is. So it's a very detailed standard. Literally, governments are sharing via their computers all this data about each other's taxpayers and citizens. The U.S. is not on it. So for a long time, the World Bank and the United Nations and other fairly Marxist to extreme socialist groups been criticizing the U.S. for not doing this. Like, well, we have some privacy rights, and here the government doesn't just take your company, at least not yet. And they've been very critical of the fact that the U.S. would not disclose all the beneficial. And there were certain states where all you have is the incorporator or organizer. You don't know the owners, the directors, the shareholders, or sub data on that group. And the criticism has been significant. So in the time since 9/11, we have the Patriot Act, we have FATCA, which has a lot of reporting, including family offices with foreign subs or foreign family offices with a presence in the U.S. Many of them have to register as foreign financial institutions. So FATCA covers family offices as well. Dodd-Frank, of course, a huge impact on family offices, particularly with respect to the exemptions and registration requirements. And so we've just got a whole host of these laws that have eroded privacy and trying to give the government more information. The Corporate Transparency Act moves in that direction more significantly in a more invasive manner than it ever has in the past. So the long and short of this act, which was passed some time ago, but the key dates are that it's very timely right now. It takes effect on January 1, 2024. And originally, all new businesses formed from January 1st on had 30 days to file these reports that would disclose the name, address, birth date, some private identification number like passport, driver's license, something like that, and a photo of all the individuals that are in a control position by virtue of ownership, filing requirements, or officers of this enterprise. And it looks through trust to ultimately get to the beneficial owners. So in effect, for the first time, the U.S. is going to have all this information in the past they were not entitled to on all these various companies. And that will be fairly extraordinary. Estimates are that there will be over 180 million of these reports filed in 2024. 180 million. So this may be like spam, and the filing fees are fairly nominal. But again, that information being out there is a risk. And the thought is, well, it's supposed to stay private in the government. Well, of course, you've got government individuals who have information. Let's hope nobody gets bribed. Let's hope no government computer ever gets hacked. The problem here is that we're counting on our government to keep information confidential, right?
More wishful thinking.
Wishful would, if we're assuming a high level of confidence and you're counting on the government to protect your privacy and security, then you are very misguided and you haven't worked with the government, or you would know better that that's highly improbable. So people are concerned, and I think they're very rightfully concerned. What the act creates is a central registry, and I think the motives behind the act are quite good. I mean, I'm all about, let's get terrorists, let's get financial criminals, let's get fraudsters, let's get money launderers. I'd love them to catch all these people. The dilemma is, I think that 99% plus of all small businesses and entities are going to have to register and file and keep current under this act. And they're going to find, 0.01% that actually did something. So the price to be paid here is, this huge group has to do this reporting and just another piece of government paperwork and filing. And there's so much of it, to me, it almost looks like spam. And then just a tiny, tiny subset, will have been those that did something wrong, because if someone's doing something wrong, they're not going to register, right? So it's going to be hard to find them because they won't see these documents at first. Like, let's outlaw guns. Yeah, it's going to work real well. The only people that will follow that law are the honest gun owners, the law-abiding citizens, and the criminals ignore it completely. Now they have more guns and we all get shot. So that hasn't worked out very well in any place that has the strongest gun control, just like Chicago, for example. Take a look at the data. Strongest gun control in the country, one of the highest murder rates. So there's almost an inverse correlation in that case. And my suspicion is that this filing is onerous, and it will potentially be less effective than the government hopes it will be. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that they catch all these bad guys. I think the objectives are laudable. I'm just afraid of how they're going about it and the price that we pay in terms of our privacy. So this central registry then is going to have a listing of whoever has substantial control or ownership or even filing responsibility for reports directly or indirectly. So what that means to me is the IRS code has a whole bunch of different provisions that we'll call attribution rules. So in some case, your ownership is attributed to your wife, your daughter, your grandson, others, not your siblings, but your mom and dad. So they have different attribution rules. But when they say directly or indirectly, anytime there's a securities type provision or financial provision interpreted by the government, you can assume places like FinCEN, the SEC, the CFTC that regulates commodities, they're going to have the broadest possible construction that they can conceive of. And that's been the case for 75, 80 years. I don't see that changing. So they are going to broadly construe this, which means they're going to maximize the coverage rather than minimize it, and the exposure will be quite significant. Penalties for not filing this, and I should say yesterday, they just passed an amendment. So the original 30-day rule for new businesses in 24 is now a 90-day rule. So any company formed from January 1 through December 31st of 2024 will have 90 days to register. Any company in existence prior to January 1, 2024 has until December 31 of 2024 to register. Those are going to be the bulk of the filings, obviously. And then from 2025 on, all new businesses formed in 2025 will have 90 days to register and comply with the new Corporate Transparency Act. The penalties for not filing look a lot like the FBAR, which is the form you file if you have any kind of foreign account. And by the SEC thinks if you have a Vlasic pickle jar buried in some island in the Caribbean with $100 in it, you need to file the FBAR. They consider that a foreign account. So again, very broadly construed definition of what constitutes a foreign account. And the penalty is $10,000 for failure to file. And I think it's like $500 a day until you hit the 10,000. So it's a significant penalty, but the IRS or other agencies will lob additional interest on top of that. So it could go up quite a bit. I've seen cases where the FBAR penalty is $10,000. The IRS calculates their fees and penalties at $274,000. So it be kind of a different day. So I would be wary to not comply. I think that would be a mistake. Not compliance, so to set yourself up as you're doing something wrong. So you just don't want to go down that path. There are a lot of exceptions to the plan. And the exceptions, though, are very easy to get your arms around. Think about it as if you're already in a regulated business, you probably are accepted. And by regulated, I mean banks, insurance companies, RIAs, broker dealers. So if the SEC, a banking regulator, commodity regulator already has you on the list, you're already giving up all this information, they're not going to look at you a second time. So this really applies to all the small businesses out there that don't think they're going to have to comply. And I think they're going to be shocked when they figure out that they do have to comply. So every little mom and pop company and LLC that owns a asset, a vacation home or a boat has to file. Family office has to file. There's no exception for family office unless you're registered as an RIA or a broker dealer or a multifamily office as one or both of those. You have to register so that it'll bring in every little entity under the sun that you think would otherwise be accepted. There is no exception. There is no de minimis exception. So it's every one of these entities. So it's as a result of that, this is going to be one of the biggest compliance issues of 2024 because it's going to catch every existing business, every new business that isn't one of the 23 on the accepted list. And again, those are institutions already regulated heavily by some other existing body, typically SEC and CFTC. The goal here is primarily directed at hiding ill-gotten gains, illegal money from criminal activities, and laundering that money. That's the absolute target. And the Panama Papers caught the government at a point where it said, look, this is just wrong. People shouldn't be doing this. And there were a significant number of people doing this, which I found shocking. U.S. citizens, after Patriot Act and all the things that have been passed, to do that is just delusional. Like, advisors should have advised you, this is like the worst thing you could possibly do, because you're going to come up in a criminal regime with onerous financial penalties and interest and fraud penalties, in addition to the possibility of jail. I would say that crosses the tax planning line by miles and miles and miles, and was very, very ill conceived. But yet there are a lot of Americans involved in the various Panama Papers disclosures. So the goal's a good one, but I think as a result, every little corporation, every little LLC, every little LLP, every LP, anything that has to file a registration statement with a state or territory or other regulator is required to file. One of the dilemmas is that people have said to me, well, that doesn't apply to my family holding company or my real estate holding company. Yes, it does. Absolutely applies. Doesn't apply to my professional practice, my little one-man CPA firm, my consulting firm, my insurance agency. Yes, it does apply to those enterprises, a little law firm. So a lot of entities that people think won't be covered are covered. Your LLC has a single piece of real estate in it. That has to file as well. So I know that we have clients with 160 to 170 different K1s, which means that there's that many LLCs, LPs, or S corporations. And guess what? They all have to file. How'd you like to have to do 170 some odd filings? And then when there's any change, you have to update those filings within 30 days. That means when you make a gift, you make a sale to the family, when you contribute it to charity, when somebody dies in the estate. So this filing and keeping current requirement is an ongoing requirement, and the same sorts of penalties apply if someone fails to do that. And the guess is that in the U.S., perhaps as much as $300 billion is being illegally transacted. And I don't know the source of that data, who came up with those estimates. I have dealt with government estimates in the past done by the scoring companies in situations where I knew the market. And I can tell you that in one case, they were four times the biggest the market could have possibly been. And I was the general counsel for this particular association. I'm the only one that had the data. Nobody contacted me. And I represented 6 or 7 of the largest trusts in the world, trusts with hundreds of billions of dollars. These are benefit plans for large employers and small employers. And no one contacted any of these employers to ask for the data. And nobody contacted me as general counsel for the association. So where they got these numbers from, I don't know. So my guess is that these numbers, they could be wildly high or wildly low. I have really no idea as to their accuracy, but I can say this: the scoring process in general, by which the government tries to balance the budget, they're using a Ouija board. They're way off or they're way under, but there's no veracity in those numbers. Nobody looks back in 4 years, like the GAO, for example, or the Comptroller General. Nobody looks back and to look at it and say, was the scoring actually accurate? Because then we can rule out or eliminate scoring companies that don't know what they're doing and have scoring companies that are actually competent at doing this work. But instead, we're balancing a budget with this Ouija board, and they could be wildly over, wildly under, and they have no idea, which partly explains why there has been a balanced budget in my lifetime. And I think the CTA is being quite deliberate. They are intentionally trying to pick up all these small companies, all the moms and pops, little operating businesses, including all the non-operating entities. If you have a vacation home or a antique car collection, you're holding an LLC just to protect them, doesn't matter. Those entities have to report as well. So I think the cost of compliance isn't particularly steep. I'm not troubled by the fees. They're nominal. What I'm troubled by is the fact the government now has this information. It's starting to look more and more like Big Brother. I'm sure it's just a matter of time. My dogs are chipped, so I can find them. I'm sure that chip will be, in a lineal descendant of my family before too long. And then you start to read Logan's Run and similar books where those chips don't work out so well for you. So I think that's the dilemma going forward. There are a number of companies out there. They're trying to come up with solutions to capture all this data. Some look like they might work. I'm sure by the middle of the year, there'll be a bunch of them up and running and farther along. And that may be a good solution for people that have a bunch of these or people that set these up. Business brokers, business owners, the various filing companies and registered agents and incorporators and so on and so forth. A limitation that's important is that large companies are also exempt, in large operating companies. So if you are a huge company and you're not operating because you're just a holding company, well, you're going to have to file. But an operating company over 5 million in revenue and 20 employees, you could be exempted out. So that will exempt some family offices, but the vast majority of family offices are below that. And the trends have been increasing outsourcing, particularly to multifamily offices, lawyers, and accounting firms for some or all of those services. So I think as a result, even more family offices will comply today than would have had to 10 years ago, just based on the trends in the industry. So I think this is all very interesting. I think for the most part, clients are fairly horrified. So, well, this can't possibly apply to me. And our response consistently is, yeah, it absolutely applies to you. I'm so sorry. So it'll be a lot of paperwork for lawyers and internal people at these various operating companies and non-operating companies. So we've had a whole new regulatory scheme here. And I only hope that all the paper and the invasion of privacy that this causes is repaid by catching the bad guys. So again, I think we should all hope for the best. I am concerned, and I don't like these regular and ongoing incursions into our privacy, because that's kind of how it works. They just nip away a little, and before you know it, you're living in a regime that we would find totally objectionable. And I can tell you already that our founders are rolling in their graves at the stuff that's going on right now. I can assure you this is absolutely not what they envisioned. This is absolutely not what they wanted. This level of government control and bureaucracy is so out of control and so out of hand. And I saw something the other day, like 28% of the GDP is spent on government, and that number keeps going up. So it's a monumental number. And here in Illinois, we're a fine example. And I want to say, like, Crook County, it was Crook where I live. And we're only the second most corrupt state. We were the third behind Louisiana and New Jersey. We passed Louisiana this year because we try harder, and we're number 2. So we're New Jersey. We're coming for you. But Chicago's been the most corrupt city, where Crook County is located for many decades. And it's like the 12th or 13th largest government in the United States. It's just massive. And I keep looking at what they do, and my conclusion, they really don't do that much. So why they need all these ghost payrollers and people, on the take is beyond my comprehension. But it isn't working, and I don't like things moving in this direction. So I'm not a big fan of this. Again, I think the objectives are wonderful, but I can't help but think there's got to be a better way to get this information than putting the 99.8% of all people not involved in these illegal activities responsible for this reporting.
Very well said. A great recap. I completely agree. It's a disgrace. The lack of privacy. Now, I admit my lens is I'm more on the libertarian side. That's just me. But like you said about the founding fathers rolling over these little things, they add up, they become more bureaucratic, they grow in size, and this leaves me gravely concerned. We'll probably have a little time to talk a little bit about certain sovereign risk, start over funds, and things that you and I have had brief conversations about, but staying on the topic a little bit longer. So again, if it's under 20 employees, which is the majority of single family offices, this will apply. How about certain trust companies, private trust companies? Families have captive insurers, the same thing. Unless they have more than 20 employees, this rule is going to apply.
Yeah, there's some interesting language, and we'll see how it shakes out. But some trusts would only have to be disclosed if their ultimate beneficiaries end up being these owners, control persons, or persons responsible for filing. A lot of trusts will be exempt, again, depending on what's in them. And like a Massachusetts business trust, because it doesn't have to file like an application, like an LLC or a corporation would. I read an article that said that they should be exempt. So I don't know the full spectrum of it, but I know that some trusts will be caught up in this snare. Other trusts might be exempt in the process. But in the 23 exclusions, although banking was one, trustees was not another.
Right.
And if they were to exclude trusts, it would be what I would guess would be what are called regulated trust companies, not private trust companies. So a regulated trust company is one that could offer services to anyone versus a private trust company that just can offer services to that family. So potentially different treatment depending on who the audience is. So I don't think that was flushed out as well as most of the pieces I've seen, but obviously it's going to be figured out very quickly because January 1, begins the filing day. And I suspect we'll see some pieces come out on this by the end of the first quarter, second quarter latest. So the rules should be cleared up a bit, but a lot of trusts are going to get caught in the snare. And in the past where we could keep the beneficiaries private, I think those days are going to be gone.
And how about like in certain states, Wyoming and others, managing member of LLC or, who holds the ownership units is rather protected and very cocooned. It looks like that's probably coming to an end.
Yeah, so there are a number of states where you do not have to disclose, again, if it's done correctly, you wouldn't have to disclose the owners, shareholders, members, or the officers or beneficiaries. You would simply have to disclose the incorporator or organizer.
Exactly.
And there are several states that had that, and people would select those states purposely, just trying to stay off the radar screen. Nobody wants, cyber hackers and hostage and kidnap people going after your family. So there's a strong incentive to stay off the radar screen if at all possible. And that just got harder to do, frankly.
Yes, of course, I always lead with Wyoming being so great, but it's not the only state. But that brings up another subject, given my travels around the world and just coming back from Austria. And again, the U.S. is not part of the common reporting standard, which I think is great. Again, we supposedly protect privacy. Now, that also applies to foreign entities that may set up LLCs, corporation structures, Delaware, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Wyoming. I'm assuming now that layer of transparency is going to apply to them in terms of lifting the veil, so to speak.
Yeah, so I've kind of thought through mechanically what this is going to look like. And I think that if the states don't change their statutes or their forms, you would still be able to avoid disclosure of that information for the state, but you can rest assured that FinCEN is going to have it, right? So
for sure,
that is a federal superseding law. Some states may say, in view of FinCEN, there's a little downside to now requesting that information. Other states will say, well, we're not going to. They'll just stand firm. But once FinCEN has it, the cat's kind of out of the bag. It's very difficult to put it back in.
For sure. So again, I think this has gone a little bit under the radar. I wanted to bring the awareness to family offices. I mean, this is my life, single family offices. Admittingly, as I become more and more international, this is primarily more of a U.S. family office issue, so maybe not quite as broad, but there are aspects of it that could, as I noted and Tom reflected, could be applicable. It's a little gray. So we'll see how some of it begins to shape out.
I would suggest, too, that families that are primarily international families and they have their primary or their control family office elsewhere, London, Dubai, wherever it happens to be, and they've got a subsidiary family office here, that subsidiary would have to register. If they have a PTC, a private trust company here, that probably has to register. If they've got a captive property and casualty insurance company, that would have to register. Only the broker, dealer, and RIA would not have to register. A real estate property management subsidiary or affiliate, that would have to register. And even like the LLC that owns a vacation home or the boat, they have to register. So, one family could end up with a dozen filings as a result of this law. And then, of course, anytime there's an organic change, you've got to refile and do an update, or you run into the same penalties for not keeping the information current. And given that FinCEN by definition is a criminal organization, they're there specifically as an anti-crime organization, you can rest assured that they're in the habit of being heavy-handed, and they need to be. These criminals need to be taken seriously, and they're a threat to us. And so I appreciate the approach. I'm just afraid the approach is going to fall onto innocent citizens who are trying to comply but mess up. So I think that they will be a little lighter in the early going until people sort of get the hang of this and the compliance is at a level that they deem acceptable. But after that, then I think there's going to not be room for a lot of mistakes. The presumption, if you got a foreign account, you don't file the FBARs and check the boxes, the presumption isn't good. The presumption is that, you probably should be in jail, and now we're going to try to find out why. So you want to be on the right side of this. And as painful as compliance might be, there's just no alternative. I would advise anyone, when in doubt, comply, over disclose rather than under disclose, because you don't want to be on the radar of a organization that's an anti-crime body.
100%. So for my audience, the issues around legal concerns and issues and regulatory, I think, are very, very important. I know they're perhaps not the most engaging or exciting topics compared to investing or me coming back from Vienna and broadly Europe, Tom, and having met with multiple families that their legacy, their heritage goes back in some cases well over 500 years. And I have much to share with my audience upcoming. I felt even after 20 years and being very on top of sovereign risk, global estate and wealth transfer issues, family governance, I felt like I learned, which was great. I could share, some of it broadly with the public and you, others to my members only, but just lots of amazing insight and areas pertaining to legal, to structuring, to being more of a global citizen, to setting up onshore and offshore plans and strategies and trust are very, very important. Does it add to more work? Sure, more cost, to some degree more headache, but it helps to mitigate certain risk. And again, in the case here, you don't want to get on the bad side and then have everything you're doing be scrutinized where they're almost looking for specifically a problem, which in a larger family with multiple interests, there probably is something inadvertently that's a bit askew that could bring not just a level of penalties, fines, monetary concern. It brings a little bit of bad press. It's not a great look. And family's reputation is very, very important. Tom, we probably have about 10 or so minutes. I'd be remiss, since of your prominence globally in the community, to just leave it at the 2024 Corporate Transparency Act, although there would be nothing wrong with that. We have covered pretty in detailed onshore and offshore structuring issue for family offices in the last month, some deep level estate planning, but happy to hear any further insights. But why don't I broadly go with, give us some trends that you're seeing as you travel the world. You've been in UK multiple times. You're probably getting more and more active in the Middle East and other parts of the world and Latin America. Tell us a little bit about some of the legal / family office trends that you may be seeing.
So tying back to your trip to Austria, where my family is from, by the way, Vienna in particular, and we represent families, in Vienna, Germany, and Switzerland. What we have found is that the fact that the U.S. is not on a common reporting standard is a big plus, because many of these families are afraid of their own country in the same way that we're sometimes afraid of ours. All it takes is a regulator out of control and you end up with a world of hurt. And so they're very concerned to avoid that CRS disclosure. And so they like the US for that reason. And I think it's accounted for an awful lot of investment in the US that might not otherwise be here due to the lack of that standard. So that has greatly benefited our economy, brought a lot of cash into the country, and that's been huge. On the flip side, we've sensed a lot of these families who aren't already in the US and don't have to report or file as taxpayers are very reluctant and will work very hard not to be here because they don't like our tax compliance. They don't like the litigation environment. They don't like the divorce marital law environment. and they're not going to like our new CTA requirements. So this is not going to help at all. And already we've had a number of families say we simply won't do anything in the U.S. because of these rules. So we get helped a lot by the lack of the common reporting standard, but we get hurt by this other heavy regulation, which just got a little bit heavier. I would say, though, that increasingly the world continues to be a flatter and more global platform. People are more and more willing to use the laws of foreign countries or states or provinces or territories, as the case might be. And, the approach initially was, 50 years ago, people would export the assets, right? Or move there or move the company there. Now it's more you're importing the law, just like people all over the U.S. form Delaware and Wyoming corporations for various reasons, or PTCs, same thing. Import the law of that jurisdiction. Doesn't mean you have to move everything to that particular state or country or province or whatever you're trying to achieve. And so the voting with your feet and cherry picking the best laws in the world is becoming the dominant protocol for the most sophisticated families. Increasingly, American families are globalizing, and there's still plenty of families that don't do anything outside of their own state, but that's becoming more of the exception. And so people are more and more willing to use this global palette to try to achieve their goals for investing, privacy, family purposes, getting things like golden visas to make travel easier, or a passport that isn't a U.S. passport, so you don't run less of a risk getting hit by the terrorists and bad guys out there, and to achieve their business and financial objectives. So I think that's going to continue. I think that's a great development. I don't think the CTA helps us, but I don't know how big of an impediment it will be, because certainly for the people in the EU, they're already subject to this kind of scrutiny. So it really isn't new for them. Other parts of the world, this will be something new.
Agreed. And taking that global perspective, which I have for a long time, but that's been amplified since I sold Family Office Association earlier this year and had become more of a private mastermind group for families and family offices and private consultant. The global picture for me is very important. You're talking to someone who developed a 3-day, 300-slide program called Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness. And a lot of that is looking at the challenges here in the United States, many challenges that could go wrong with a further lack of privacy, and grave challenges, I could argue, in our government, our economics, regulatory, a lot of different perspectives. But looking at it from a global perspective for a moment, there's sometimes a little bit of a disconnect with certain families. 100%. They should definitely have trust, assets, resources, passports, residency in various select spots around the world. And that appears to change where you may need to adapt that. But there's a little bit of a lack of understanding, and in the US side, it's a little more complicated having green card or citizenship with the tax regime following you everywhere. So there's not necessarily going to be tax arbitrage like practically every other citizen would get. But besides that, you could have a trust entity offshore. You could have an SFO management company and LLCs also offshore. Let's say for some international families in maybe the EU, they do want to get tax arbitrage. They may want to set something up in the United Arab Emirates, Singapore, or another location. Oh, but Angelo, I don't know if I want my assets there. I didn't say your assets. I said the trust structures and the SFO and the management company. Your assets could be completely decoupled even from those areas. Talk a little bit about that, Tom.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. I had a 2-hour plus meeting today with a CPA attorney out of LA who's from Chicago originally, and has become a real estate mogul. So he's now hundreds of millions kind of guys, all stuff. And his assumption, despite the fact that he's got impressive qualifications, was that if I set things up in these various jurisdictions, that the assets have to go there. And I said, well, I have one of those that we just talked about, and none of my assets are there, nor do I ever plan to put my assets there. That's not the point. It's the import the law scenario. How many Delaware corporations are there? And there aren't that many that are camped out doing most of their business in Delaware. So it's the same kind of concept. And I think there's certain naivete, but there are things that you can do to protect yourself pretty significantly. Like in the international arena, for example, trust protectors are the norm. There may be 80, 85% of all trusts. In the US, I'm going to guess they're 10% of all trusts. So having a trust protector, and I'm speculating just off of what I've seen, I have no good data, but that's my guess. But having that trust protector where, your island or country has a coup, or your island sinks into the sea, or somebody invades, you immediately not only want to move the money, you want to move the entity out of there, and flight provisions with a trust protector would allow you to do that. So anything that provides safety, optionality, and a fallback position is of value. And having a trust protector and mechanisms to move, whether you merge it with another company, then kill the subsidiary in the bad country, there's a lot of ways to get there. And the same rules apply to US states. So we move around the states, and 40 years ago, Bahamas were one of the best asset protection jurisdictions. Not so good today, right? And there's other government regulatory problems there. When you get your first $140 phone bill for one call to the United States, you realize just how good the phone systems are down there. The jurisdictions have changed, and when that happens, we move almost everything out of there. We have no loyalty to the jurisdiction other than it's got a great set of laws. When somebody puts in materially better laws, we fly as many as we can to those new jurisdictions. So that provides a measure of safety. You have less government regulatory risk. You have less political risk. And of course, military overtake, country blows up, hurricane wipes it off the map. Those risks are diminished as well. And again, in most cases, the assets aren't sitting in those jurisdictions anyway. The operation might be there, a business might be there, or a trust might be there, but the assets or the people could be anywhere else. They could be in a PEO in New York, for that matter.
Sure. And speaking of international locales, I was obviously very close to one that is iconic when we mention the world of wealth, and one that I'll be much, much more active in moving forward from a variety of hard assets, including gold, from other perspectives, and that would be Switzerland. Now, Switzerland, ironically, for those that may not know, is part of the common reporting system. Imperfect, look what happened with Credit Suisse. So again, that's why optionality is important. But perhaps if I were concerned about sovereign risk of my actual quote unquote asset, and I wanted to have a little bit of diversity, maybe 10% away from the US, that probably would be one of the locales I would potentially look at. What kind of experiences have your clientele has had, whether international with Switzerland or in the US? And exactly for what I said, you may define that as things go to hell in a handbasket, and we both use some of the same terminology, kind of a start over fund.
Sure. I'll say that over the years, a lot of our clients have used Switzerland, both as custodians, trustees, bankers, or source of investments, and we continue to do so. So it's got very good laws, tight laws, protecting privacy and security as much as they can, sophisticated bankers. And so when you want to deal with world caliber people who are good at it, Switzerland is just one of those locations. I remember going to a European family office. It was the Association of Family Offices, Trust Companies, and Banks. And my eyes aren't great. So I got there about 20 minutes ahead of time, thinking I'm going to get a seat in front so I can actually see what's going on.
You're in for a surprise.
And I got there, and here's 150 guys in black suits with white shirts and dark ties, and they're rolling their fingers on the desk waiting for the meeting to start because they are all frickin' Swiss bankers and trust officers. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the back of the room, I'm 20 minutes ahead of time. So it was a great lesson in the level of precision. No one's ever late for a meeting. People do things on time. And there are some very interesting, some great custodians. There's some great money managers, great banking laws, great trustees, and the problem people kind of got weeded out. Vageland, one of the oldest, most prestigious small trust companies, the U.S. wiped them out because they did all this non-compliant stuff. Well, they're gone. They're off the map. And so the people that are there now, some of them even went to the U.S. and said, "Tell us what to do. We don't want any problems. You tell us, and then give us a clean bill of health." So it's kind of a new day over there. And those bank privacy and secrecy laws are important. They're important in any jurisdiction that you're doing business, particularly if you want asset protection and privacy. So I'm a fan, and just coincidentally, the second and third billionaire family to ever hire us were Swiss families. So our first family was a Japanese family, so it wasn't until the fourth billionaire happened to be an American family we got hired by these international families. So we've been working there and doing business there a long time, have built up a network of people, and it's a very solid, and it's often used. It's one of the top custodian jurisdictions on the planet: New York, London, Singapore, Hong Kong, Zurich, just part of the deal. So I actually had a great trip there, got to stick around, and I skied Le Doubleray. I don't speak French very well, and Schlag, and just had a ball. Stayed at a chalet on the side of the mountain, and never skied where nothing is marked, and it's 15 foot of powder, and you could ski over someone's home and you wouldn't know it until you had to jump over the front sidewalk. But just a tremendous experience in terms of the culture, the food, the hiking, the skiing was wonderful. So I'm a big fan. I probably spent more time in Geneva than in Zurich, but for business purposes, they're top flight jurisdictions.
I agree. I did mention one other in United Arab Emirates. Some would say Dubai within their other locations. You mentioned Hong Kong and Singapore. We could do deeper dives in the future. And those are all areas that I look to be more active in and visit in 2024 and provide to my relationships, especially my members, connectivity as well as opportunity. But broadly speaking, from the things we're discussing, from privacy to asset protection, and again, for my audience, there's multiple chess pieces here. The trust company, perhaps a private trust company, LLCs, corporations, foundations, which I didn't even mention, and where the assets actually are. Maybe there's a nominal amount of assets in those areas because you deem them to be of some level of risk, but that doesn't, you don't have to have the assets there. Now, well, that gets a little tricky. Certain locations, Switzerland and other, they may negotiate that you do have a greater percentage of assets there. We'll save that discussion for a little bit of a deeper time. But talk a little bit about maybe your experiences in the Middle East, in Asia, like you mentioned, Singapore and Hong Kong, and kind of how you're playing, I guess, in my analogy that I gave, a little bit of a game of chess.
Sure. Well, you have a number of these global jurisdictions that are working to be the up and coming emerging financial center, right? So places like Doha, Dubai. There's a number in the Middle East. There's a number in Asia. Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong in particular, and they've always had fairly sophisticated capacity. They're trying to beef it up and be attractive for other people to provide service. The same way that Delaware and Wyoming pass attractive laws to encourage business. They're doing the same thing, and they're quite good. I think that Hong Kong has lost a lot of money because of the various games that China's played. I just saw they just like attacked a crew of South Korean boats on some island. I'm like, great, they can't find something better to do. So China's become a problem, and I pulled all my money out of there. I kind of had it, and I've been there a number of times, and I've work with Chinese families, and I'm just not a fan of what's going on. It's kind of like hard to be a fan of Putin at the same time. You go into Mongolia, you go into Georgia, you go into Crimea. You're now on Ukraine. Like, really, how many chances do you get? I don't have much patience for the system or the man. But I think these jurisdictions, as they compete with each other to be the premier jurisdictions, the winners are the families, because the cost of transactions go down, the cost of custody, the trust, cost of execution. It's a positive. And again, in a global marketplace, the more efficient they become, the better off we all are. And it's quite material. I wouldn't exclude any place unless it's objectionable to you for some other reason. I would look at this global template and pull from the full color palette to try to achieve your objectives. And I think that will continue. It's continued to expand. The world is flat and getting flatter. I don't really see that changing much, though there's always a little retrenchment at a time of war. The Ukraine thing is not helping anybody. And, my good buddy in North Korea launching missiles haphazardly around the place. That's not a good thing. China, creating a military base in every little made up atoll that they can find with a piece of coral. That's not making me feel much better. So there's a lot of things out there that are unsettling. But these jurisdictions, so I think Hong Kong, its losses have benefited Switzerland and Tokyo and Singapore in particular as people move out of there, and probably Dubai, at the same time. So, somebody losers will be somebody else's winners. And this is all good news for American taxpayers because you have more options and more places that you could potentially transact business and know that there's a high level of discipline and security.
And of course, as we did hint at, for the non-U.S. citizen or green card holder, although we may bitch and moan about a lot of the challenges, and we have many here in the United States, it still has certain advantages. And it's going to be attractive, not just being not a part of the CRS, at least for now. There are obviously other advantages. And the U.S. to some is going to be looked at as a haven. Some would say specifically a tax haven. I'll let you personally decide that if you're international and coming in. But certainly there are advantages. Tom, this has been great. We actually got a lot done within 1 hour. I'd love to give you an opportunity on either of the subjects we covered to give a little bit of a personal thoughts and a close. And importantly, for those in the U.S. or international that would like to learn more about you, have an opportunity to reach out, how could they learn more and how could they do so?
Well, thank you. So first, I'm based in our Chicago office. We've got people on the ground in Scottsdale, Washington, D.C., Naples, Florida, Palm Beach, Florida, and New York, but most of us are based in the main office in Chicago. The firm is Handler Thayer. We've got a website. We're not too hard to track down. I would say I'm very curious about 2024, in part because of our upcoming elections. It'll be very interesting to see how things play out. But given the incredible amount of money spent by the U.S. and other countries, partially due to COVID and partially because of unprecedented handouts that some made no sense and some made sense that never seemed to end, we find ourselves with deficit spending like we've never encountered before in the U.S. And the result of that, it shouldn't come as a surprise to us, but according to the Tax Foundation, one of the more credible sources of information, in 2022, 60% of the U.S. population paid no income tax. I would argue that that's not tenable and absurd. Meanwhile, the top 1% paid about 43% of all taxes. The top 10% paid almost everything. Every year since World War II, on average, the tax bite on the top 1% has gone up. So my expectation, it will continue to go up, and now it'll go up precipitously. In the States, which affects international families that have interest or family members here, the huge new budget given to the IRS, they're out hiring left and right. They're going to have to train these people. But over the last 25 years, the number of overall examinations has actually dropped, while the number of examinations of businesses and top 1% have gone through the roof. So the IRS is trying to efficiently manage its resources. And what that means is that businesses and bigger businesses are going to be scrutinized much more carefully, including family offices and family holding companies. Large partnerships are a big target. So you're going to have a lot of people going after major hedge funds, private equity funds, and huge real estate funds. And then the top 1% kind of goes without saying. That's where the money is. High income, high net worth are going to be a target. So not only do you have this whole new body of people who at this point are relatively untrained and inexperienced coming into the market, that can help you or hurt you. I would rather have somebody competent and talk about issues than have somebody doing things erratically because they don't understand the complexity of the law. That's going to be a problem for a while until these people get trained up and some experience under their belt. But look for significantly more audits of the top 1% and of businesses in particular. And that's without the impact of the wealth squad, who continues to to get more formidable over time. And this is a body of highly trained agents from all over the country. So when you get the examination, it says, Bill from San Francisco and Susan from New York and Patty from Tennessee are going to come pay you a visit. pretty good chances that's a wealth squad audit because they're based all over the country. They're not resident in one office. And their stated minimum is 30 million of net worth. I've not seen them go to any of our clients without at least 100 million of net worth, and most of the families have been quite a bit bigger than that. But their complete comprehensive audit is very invasive and very time consuming and very expensive. And even if you win on everything, you lost because your people can't do their jobs. They're so wrapped up in these examinations because they're so onerous. So I would say that anything you can do to stay off the radar screen is a positive. But people assume that because you have tax shelters that are registered, or you've got listed transactions, or you've got foreign entities, you're more likely to get audited. You're really not. If you're complying, often they won't even look at you. We have a lot of clients that, hundreds and hundreds of these offshore trusts or offshore family holding companies, they never get audited. They go, why would they audit you? There's millions of Americans that are non-compliant, either intentionally because they don't know the rules. They're looking for them. They're going to go at them first. Why would they bother with you? They already know what you have and where it is, and you complied. There's not much to be gained from hauling you in. These things are, in most cases, tax neutral. So the focus is on compliance and raising revenue. And in their business-like approach, they're going where the money is. So I think the writing on the wall is that every tax of every kind in the U.S. has to go up. Globally, that's pretty much the case as well, resulting from the mess that COVID created and the compliance requirements and down business, down revenue, so on and so forth, down travel, on and on and on. So globally, that's my expectation. In the US, even more so. And as those taxes go up, the attempts to mitigate those taxes to whatever level you deem as, let's face it, paying taxes is a privilege. I don't mind paying taxes. I just don't want to give the government half my money and then give them the other half when I die. It doesn't seem quite right. So there's some level that people are comfortable at. And like you, Angela, I'm never leaving here. I love the United States. I even love Chicago. I just want to deport about half of our politicians. Would be far better off. But these are
that's low.
Perhaps more. But I think that tax planning and estate planning need to move up on the priority list if you're not already. And because of these new laws, privacy and confidentiality also need to be a priority because you don't want to be subject to these criminals, cyber hackers, thieves, criminals, hostage and kidnap, gold diggers, salesmen, anyone. You just want to stay off that radar screen. So that focus is very, very specific, and you have to work at it to get there. But I would say on the risk management side overall, think about it as one being responsible conduct, and many of the big families have conduct protocols. The 16-year-old can't take out the car when he first gets his or her license for the first 6 months with a passenger or have the radio playing, right? Whatever the rule is, they're trying to protect them from themselves. Or the high school kids can't be the vacation home on a boat with a refrigerator full of beer without some adult supervision at the vacation home. Conduct protocols are one thing. Insurances are another. Legal structures are another to protect you from liabilities and things that come at you. And the insurance could be captives, Lloyd's syndicates, special risk policies, D&O policies, things that are a little beyond what most families will contemplate. Those things are all on the table at this point and should be considered. And then ultimately, the specific start-over fund, some sort of an asset that not even your government can get, where you have something left over if everything blows up. And among our client base, the incidence of families going from a huge amount, hundreds of millions, down to nothing, we've had 6 families go completely bankrupt. And my thought is once you get over 100 million, you should never go bankrupt, but they did. 4 of these were real estate families. The other were, class action and government proceeding, but they're gone. And the biggest family was over 700 million, and they're gone. So the steps to mitigate that risk and put more time and effort into risk management is warranted. Stay private, and then mitigate your taxes across the board to a level that you feel comfortable with, or make larger gifts to your foundations, donor advised fund, or supporting organization, or all the above to mitigate that risk. There's things you can do, but I think that's going to be the primary focus for 2024 if I had to read the tea leaves.
Excellent. And how could people learn more about Handler there and reach out to you?
Our website's probably the best source. Obviously, we're on LinkedIn. We have lots of publications in the open domain. There's probably 20 of our presentations on YouTube. So we shouldn't be too difficult to find, but the Handler Thayer website is accessible, and that should lead you to a lot of it. If you Google us, you'll find a bunch of things as well. So shouldn't be difficult to find, but as I said, we're in Chicago, and we probably have clients in 40 plus states in most of the territories, and probably 30 to 35 international jurisdictions as well. So we don't cover every country, but we cover the ones that we've been there traditionally, or some of our families moved there. That's how we ended up in Singapore. We had a couple of American families move there, so we just followed them, along the way.
That's fantastic, Tom. In terms of my close, which I'll try to make a little bit short, I loved this conversation. I live for this, and I know it may not be all your cup of tea. It may not be the most exciting thing. It's exciting to me. My world is this. It is the single family office, and much more so than really ever before with my 2 decades in it, very international. Again, like I said, going to multiple countries in Europe and opening up my eyes, being in Austria, meeting with multiple families that go back literally hundreds, in 2 cases, over 1,000 years. And the lessons learned on legacy, on governance, on what assets, on jurisdictional fluidity, and a variety of different things, like it was a wow experience. Now, some of that I'll share a little bit broadly, but others, you really have to commit and be a part of a special group, a special kind of mastermind that I noted, what I built and am building at SFO Continuity, which is an intimate group initially of 30 founding and charter members. And I really look for that to be about half in the US and half international. And the opportunity of putting together really deep critical thinking. Too much in the family office world is light, it's fluff, it's sponsor driven, it's not good. I'm just being flat out honest, especially if you're a family principal. So the opportunity of building a true peer group, of building critical thinking, deeper thinking, connectivity to the world's leading experts like Tom on a favorable basis, my best practices, the work that I'm doing internationally, and the connectivity in all the regions of the world that I noted that is growing more rapidly than ever before heading into 2024. And then coming with me to my next trip to Switzerland, to Liechtenstein, to Austria, to the UK, to Sweden, to the Middle East, to Latin America, to Singapore. Let's truly make this global. But I need your commitment. You have to see the value, which is a hell of a lot deeper, I think, than what you're getting now in other organizations. And I'm not talking about sponsor driven. I'm talking about driven by the family and the family office, something real, something tangible, true value that you get. So go to angelorobles.com, reach out. That's my website that for now kind of encompasses everything. My preferred email is angelo@angelorobles.com. I'm on all social medias. You could DM, you could reach out to me. You could simply WhatsApp me if you want, or just simply call. I'm an open book. I probably only sleep 3 to 4 hours a day, so feel like I'm always up. 203-570-2898 here in the US. And again, and by the way, yes, I do love Wyoming, but right to the east of Wyoming is also an incredible state that I probably don't talk enough about. I do also love South Dakota. Me and my family have traveled there. I've driven there from the East Coast. I've seen all the amazing beauty, really, of America in general, but South Dakota, Wyoming are amazing states. Nevada too. There's so many. Again, although I bitch and moan here and there about some of the challenges that we have, and like Tom said, Lord knows we have many. And I really don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. But I do understand that I'm an American. I have no interest in leaving. I want to make our country here the best country that we could be. But having optionality, having fluidity, becoming more of a global citizen, having some level of assets offshore, including, I would definitely argue, art and gold, are all things that I talk about, and my members really get more secretive, more direct access to the kind of the proper way to do that. On that note, I've already took too much time. Thank you all so much. Tom, you've been a great guest. Have a wonderful Christmas, a great holiday season, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you, not just talking, but seeing you in person in 2024.
That would be great. Thank you so much for having me. Merry Christmas to you and your family as well.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.